Okay, you're welcome along to Wednesday Night Rugby. We have Rory O'Connor from the Irish Independent with us. Good afternoon.
Hey, Joe.
You are fresh from your weekend run, which raised lots of money. Good man.
Yeah, big rugby run. Raised some funds for Feed the Heroes. I think it raised €40,000 in total across all the different people that did it. Former professionals, under nines teams across the country. It worked out really well. It was great. And it was, in fairness, we got the nicest day of the year so far. It was a little bit too hot, really. It nearly killed me, but that was good fun. Did 14K with myself, Murray Kinster from the 42, and Keane Tracy from the Indo did a marathon between us. So I did the middle leg. I was sagging in the middle. They're both a bit younger and quicker than I am.
I thought your time was perfectly respectable. 40,000 raised is great going, isn't it? It's amazing at the moment, the generosity. Every charity campaign that's on seems to raise more money than they're expecting.
Yeah, I felt a bit I feel like everyone's kind of, because everyone's bored and there's nothing to do, they're kind of, doing something for charity and stuff. I kind of felt a bit bad. I'm sure people are sick of getting emails and texts and WhatsApps about raising money, but it was a good cause, and it was a good thing. Nice to have a bit of focus in this kind of weird time that we're having, to have something to train for. So need to find something else now.
Well, listen, good man. Fair play to you. So let's treat this as a bit of a catch-all. It's kind of a month or so since we've spoken, and it's worth just catching up on the little bits and pieces that are going around in rugby, as well as us doing nostalgia pieces and feature interviews. Let's start with the obvious point then. We're certainly not returning to play anytime soon. The RFU have come out and confirmed there will be no return to team training come May the 18th.
Yeah, one of the less surprising kind of announcements or statements that they've made. I think the fact that it was explicitly listed in the government's roadmap to a return as being part of stage 5 on August 10th, that obviously meant that there's no point in the players even trying to come back on May 18th, which was the initial plan when they were stood down about 6 weeks ago now. So they'll continue to train at home. I believe what the plan is now is on Friday, I think all the sports are in with the government. I think the RFU will get more clarity then about what they'll be allowed to do from a training point of view, whether the August 10th date is a return to play or a return to training, whether they'll be able to gather in small groups. But I think what they hope to do is to start in June, bringing back groups of 4 or 5 in different pods, start working together, start doing a bit of proper fitness, maybe even just to get lads out of their back gardens and back into some sort of a team environment. Because for all that, I spoke to Jordan Larmour last week for a piece, and he was enjoying the training element. They must be getting a bit stir crazy with and it must be quite hard to motivate yourself. Then they hope, I think, to ramp that up then from the groups of 4 or 5 to more kind of collective training. I think you would have 2 teams on alternate days, or one team coming in the morning, one team coming in the afternoon in each province, with a view to being able to actually play once stage 5 comes in on August 10th. New Zealand have kind of created a roadmap back, because they're coming back with a Super Rugby tournament, just themselves on June 16th, and I think everyone's going to be watching that to see how they pull it off, how they kind of they're able to contain to contain themselves. I mean, players are being told, do not mix with apart from people in your squad and people at home, don't try and stay out of the way of other people and all that sort of thing. So I think that's going to be the template we're working towards. But yeah, May 18th was kind of a date set in a very different time before we know what we know now. But when you look at the World Rugby guidelines and how it's going to be, how do you manage a return? It looks very difficult to get all the stages together, no less than the Bundesliga or the Premier League. How do you keep squads of this size infection free for the period that you need to play? And then if you read Kingston Mills in the Irish Times today, I mean, he's talking about running, but he throws in the line in the middle of it. So he's the immunologist. I'm sure people are aware of him now, but he throws in the line in the middle of it. If one person in a front row has the virus, all 6 are going to get it. Are going to leave the scrum with it, which is a pretty sobering message for those who are trying to pull this off for rugby.
Even a cursory glance at the financial situation for rugby in Ireland is eye-watering at this stage. So we know that somewhere around 80% of revenue comes from the international game, and it's not like soccer. It doesn't have the ginormous TV deals. We are talking about a sport that is still somewhat antiquated in a way, in that it is still reliant on gate receipts, and that is how the bulk of money will be made. There will be millions coming in prize money if they get the Six Nations done, and I'm sure there is TV money. But rugby, Irish rugby, without gate receipts over the next, let's say, year, conservatively, How much trouble is it in, Rory, do we think?
A lot of trouble, if that's the case. I mean, in to use a phrase that we kind of heard quite frequently in 08 and 09, it's a very open economy. It's very interconnected internationally. I mean, the provinces play in competitions that they don't play in a domestic competition at all. That's probably how we'll start back. How do you sell that to broadcasters? We all know the TV market here is not that big. The money, broadcasters are struggling as well as everyone else. So, where's the money going to come from to fund that? Ireland needs everyone to be able to play against each other, really, to start making some money, and they need bums on seats to make the whole thing tick. So I think it's 81% of the RFU's revenue comes from the international senior men's international team. I think it's 96%. I could be wrong on that. That comes from the men's professional game. So that is even stuff like Leinster, Munster being cancelled, or even being played behind closed doors. That's $1 million off the table for one of the for the provinces, a bit for the RFU in terms of their their rental for the Aviva Stadium. Leinster Saracens gone by the wayside. Prize money has been put on hold. So I think Philip Brown has said that they can get to September with their kind of cash flow as is, having agreed a temporary wage deferral scheme with the players and their staff, all 500 staff they have employed, of between 10 and 50%, with the highest earners taking the biggest hit. They can get to September in that regard, but they need the cash to start coming in. So I think gate receipts are obviously huge. I think if they going even behind closed doors, and in the absence of everything else, broadcasters are willing to pay a little, something towards it, they can keep the show on the road. Plus, they're allowed to apply for a World Rugby Relief Fund. I think they're allowed to apply for up to 9 million from that, which would be a help. I think they have to demonstrate that they're a bit like what they've done, what they've shown to their clubs. The clubs, if they want the RFU relief funds, they have to show they're in financial difficulty. In the same way, the RFU have to demonstrate to World Rugby that they're in financial difficulty if they're to get this €9 million. And I'm sure, like, the RFU in England have said that they will need to go to the government for support if, say, next season Six Nations does not go ahead. Like, if the Six Nations doesn't go ahead in 2021, it's a pretty appalling vista for Irish rugby. We're way off that point yet, and I'm kind of loath to make big predictions because, 2 months ago we didn't know where we'd be now, and it's hard to. And I'm sure you're doing this with all your contributors over the time. Like, they still hope to be back on the pitch in August. They still, like, Aina Falvey was quite bullish in the Irish Times. The Pro14 are quite bullish about trying to finish their season, despite the fact that there was reports last week that they just handed to Leinster. But it's hard when you listen to someone like Dr. Killian de Gascoigne, the Kingston Mills, when you read what you read, and everyone's kind of becoming a bit of a pseudo expert in immunology at this stage. It's hard to be optimistic about it, but they feel like, and obviously acceptable risk is going to come into it, all this sort of stuff. But yeah, if it doesn't come back this November, if the November internationals are cancelled, which looks like it might happen because of international travel restrictions, that's a big issue for the RFU. If it extends beyond Christmas and you're talking Six Nations, or even Six Nations behind closed doors, that's a big issue. They've kind of kept stum on how big an issue it'll be. We haven't been able to get them on the record about where they're at the moment. It'll be very interesting to see when they do eventually break cover what that impact will be. But I guess they will hope that the government will be able to help them to some degree. They have that World Rugby break glass in case of emergency kind of thing, but they'd be loath to go back to that, because even that will compromise their position of strength on the World Rugby table. So there's all sorts of things at play.
It's a scary precipice. Meanwhile, Augustin Pichot has taken his ball and he's gone home.
Yeah, he has, and that's no surprise. I think he's been vice chair for 4 years. He's been on the board. He pretty much ran Argentinian rugby for probably 8-9 years since he retired as well. And I don't think we've seen the last of him either, but it would be quite difficult, I'm sure, for him to sit at that table having made the pitch that he did and lost. He lost fair and square. The rules were, the odds were always stacked against him because of the arcane voting structures that are in place that hand Six Nations such a massive block and such an amount of power, plus the kind of questionable setup that, say that Pacific Islands are often they vote against their own interests for some reason, and like there's all sorts of chicane. We saw with the World Cup 2023, Ireland at Ireland's expense, the chicanery that went on before then. So Bill Bowman gets a chance to do what he didn't do for the first 4 years of his tenure. He has the significant political weight of Bernard Laporte behind them. Laporte is a serious heavy hitter. Bowman is a kind of a continuity kind of character. They're both Six Nations men. it's probably good news for the IRFU, if not for the global game. You know, they did vote for Bill Bowman. They, you know, they didn't even, I don't think they even heard what Pishot had to say. I think they were always going to vote with the RFU and with the Six Nations on it. And I think from a global perspective and a growing the game perspective, it's probably, it's a short-term blow. And, you know, whether, and like I've been listening to Keith Wood on that series that you guys are doing, and, you know, there's a question as to whether rugby needs to go global. You know, I think in the next 5 years, we're going to see a constricting of the game a little bit, and that may be where rugby finds its own strength, and it may actually end up being good. But you know, Pishot, I think, is justified in taking his ball and going home and take. You know, I hope he comes back, even though I don't think he was probably as revolutionary as he was painted. I do think that having someone with a bit of dynamism, who has a bit of a different viewpoint on it in a pretty stuffy boardroom, is a good thing. Whether he's the man to lead the game forward, I don't know. Like, I mean, at the end of the day, he was vice chair for the last 4 years, so it's not as if he got a lot done.
Well, perhaps politically, that's why it's the shrewd move to go away now, rather than serve for the next 4 years and then try to espouse a campaign where he'll be part of change, having been part of World Rugby for the previous 8 years. So he goes away. It's probably a difficult second tenure for Beaumont. You know, it's a tough time to be trying to revolutionise the game, and maybe Pishot re-emerges in a couple of years as a real alternative. On the World Rugby front, so their first test is the next 12 months, as we've discussed. On Monday, there was a piece in The Guardian. Not surprisingly, Premiership clubs and top 14 clubs are demanding a seat at the table here when it comes to restructuring the international calendar, certainly in the short term. So they have written a letter to World Rugby, and they have said it's essential, to use their word, essential that domestic leagues are involved in shaping the post-pandemic landscape. So what we have here, if we ignore Killian de Gascon for a moment, which is not that easy to do once you've read that piece with Gavin Kumsky, but if you ignore what seems very likely in the eyes of medical people for a moment about a return in the short term, if, as rugby hopes, we get this window in October to get the international game up and running, and that generates revenue, international game then comes into massive conflict with domestic rugby, because Heineken Champions Cup, for instance, will be expecting to play around then. Eddie Jones, I don't think, is guaranteed his players for any matches which are rescheduled for October. So will the English clubs give Eddie Jones his players? That's unlikely. You've got Pro14. You've got everything kind of saying, well, this is our time. And you'll have World Rugby saying, well, frankly, international game brings in the money, so we need to just clear the decks here and put those summer tours into October. So that's actually the first big thing for Beaumont to hurdle. And there has been an accusation that he maybe isn't as likely as Pishot to take on the English and French clubs. So this is actually an interesting litmus test.
And I wonder if he should be taking them on. I mean, they're part of the game. They're you know, in many ways they're propping up the game financially. You know, and you know, whether the French and English unions will be able to pay them, the players, the salaries that they get, and organise them as well. You know, that remains to be seen. I know we have a very union-centric viewpoint here in Ireland, because we're, you know, our system is done by the unions, but the clubs and the club owners in France and England, you know, do the games from service. They get a bad rep, and often they do silly things that, you know, kind of besmirch their own reputation, like tearing up ERC and replacing it with EPCR that didn't really, you know, you would question whether that actually had any real tangible benefit, although the competition is probably better at the end of it. So I do think that they should be part of the discussion. I mean, they are massive stakeholders in the game. They put an awful lot of money into the game. They own the players, for want of a better phrase. They hold their contracts. They pay them from a week-to-week basis. And like, the system doesn't work. The schedule is mad. And Bill Bowman says the Six Nations is sacrosanct, that he grew up in it. You know, he grew up with the Six Nations being played in the window it has. And, you know, we're all used to the Six Nations being in February and March. But I mean, why is that sacred? Why is that? I know it works from a broadcasting point of view, but if it's strong enough, then why not think about moving it? Why not try and align things so that you play all your club rugby, then you switch to international rugby like they do in Southern Hemisphere, and it's got a flow to the season. I don't think anything should be off the table right now. And I do think that the club owners, I think if they were more involved and more part of the solution, then they'd cease to be as much of a problem. Like, World Rugby almost tries to pretend that they don't exist. And I don't think that's a sustainable model, particularly when the clubs have such control in those two countries, which are two of the three most populous rugby playing countries in the world in terms of playing populations. So, you know, Bowman has a massive challenge on his hands. He's very much a union man. he's seen in that way, and I think he's got a perception challenge on his hands when it comes to dealing with those clubs. But I think he's got, like, because they financially probably need World Rugby support as well, if you can find a way of making it attractive to them, because all those owners are under, like Jackie Lawrence-Eddy, for example, in Paris, is a property developer. Like, property's getting squeezed. He's not going to have them, even though he signed Curtly Beale yesterday. I've heard of a few more deals that haven't been able to come off for Racing, because, you know, he's feeling the squeeze. All across French and English rugby, the owners will be feeling the squeeze. If World Rugby can kind of come in there and offer some sort of solution to some financial problems, I think they'll probably find some leeway in the scheduling. And I think at the end of the day, it looks unlikely that those Southern Hemisphere tours are going to go ahead this year, because, like, New Zealand's borders are closed at the moment. You know, our team's going to go in quarantine for 2 weeks before they go and play a match. Maybe that's what Ireland do in Australia, but it seems like an awful waste of their time, and the time when they could be playing games and generating cash. There's a lot of road to go before we get to that point. I think if we get a European Champions Cup playoff and a couple of domestic tournaments and maybe a Six Nations runoff or a second Six Nations or something, we'll be doing very, very well.
Yeah.
And I think if World Rugby can kind of help facilitate that, I think they're sharing all the conversations around scheduling at the moment. That's a chance to get people on side, to impress the club owners and what they're doing. And then you come out of it and you go, well, hang on a second, why don't we start next season in December or January? And you transition towards an annual calendar year in a more, this is like all these different conversations. The opportunity is there to try and restart things in a better way. And the fact that we've stopped gives us that chance, even though it's not an ideal circumstance. So, like, I think there's opportunity there for Beaumont. Whether he's the man or off, I just don't know.
Yeah, no, they're all very, very fair points. With the view to October, I mean, one of the quickest ways to release a couple of million for everybody Six Nations wise is to finish the Ireland-Italy game and then have that last weekend, and then suddenly the prize money gets floated around the unions and to France as well, and that's a few million in the bank. And then Ireland were obviously due to go to Australia. So what are the whispers on that? I mean, is that being talked about as likely for October, that we'll have Ireland flying all the way down there? I mean, is that really the world that we're envisaging? I don't know, but is that the whisper, that Ireland Australia will be refixed for October?
I think they still hope to do it, and Donald Lennon is a fairly well-informed looking piece in today's Examiner that kind of says that they'll go over and quarantine for 2 weeks before they play a game down there, and that's coming straight after a Champions Cup final, I think, on October 10th. So I think you're going to have three, if they can pull this off, the current plan, 3 Interpros in August into I think it's Pro14 semi-finals, and maybe it's a round or two of Pro14 semi-finals and final. I can't exactly remember.
Yeah.
Then you play a Champions Cup. You know, if Leinster get the Champions Cup final, or Ulster, they're still in it as well. You go from there to Australia. You basically quarantine for 2 weeks. Then you play 2 games in Australia. Then you come back and you play your Six Nations games. And I suppose if you go to Australia, then you're hoping that they'll come to you and you play Australia, South Africa, and Japan. I mean, I think those trans hemisphere games seem highly, whatever about the rest of it, they seem highly unlikely. But I guess they are, if you're contracted to play those games, and like a lot of these things that we've been through this kind of whole cycle, until they're told they probably can't cancel it. They can't get out of those contracts. It seems like an awful waste of time to quarantine for 2 weeks before you play a match, to take all your best players down. Like, we're short on weekends as it is if we do restart. So what do we waste? What do we burn in one to play to? Essentially, what are 2 friendlies? I know test matches, friendlies, people don't like those terms. And maybe you play a third game in Dublin. Sorry, you're down to play a third game, so you make it a series that, game 3 is in Dublin, and you can sell that. But I feel like that's unrealistic. I think we're looking more local if we can get to restarts. I think we're looking at more if we can get. I mean, God, what we hear from England this week, it looks unlikely. But if we can get kind of a bubble with the UK, then you can play some sort of a tournament with them. Like, the fact that the island is split is a big problem for public health, but it's also a massive problem for Irish rugby. I mean, we've seen reports that Ulster could relocate to Dundalk, which would be very interesting.
Well, about time.
Some press box wag did say, they've got so many Leinster players, it's about time they moved south to the border. So, everything's on the table. Like, I don't have any definitive answers. I think that's what the plan is right now. If you ask me next week, that plan will have changed. It's pretty insane. I think if we can get any sort of domestic tournament in the Aviva Stadium behind closed doors during the summer, late summer, early autumn, we'll be doing very well. If they can play the Champions Cup, given they have to get France and England on side at the same time as Ireland, they'll be doing really, really well. And if they can play any international rugby, it'll be an amazing achievement. And I mean, it's in my personal interest that they start playing rugby as soon as possible. I really hope I'm wrong.
Yeah.
based on what I've been reading and stuff, it's hard to be hugely optimistic about it all.
Remind me, sorry, this is like a different lifetime ago. There's Leinster, Saracens. There's still French teams involved, aren't there?
Yeah, Clermont Racing. Toulouse are hosting Ulster.
Well, they're not anymore then. So like that's gone, according to the French Prime Minister, till September.
Yeah, and the French have abandoned their season and they want to start a full top 14 in September from September 16th, I think. Yeah. And I'm sure you'll talk to Roger about this at some stage. Like that, they're now having another political scrap is going on because they want next season's Champions Cup expanded because Toulouse are currently outside. If it's the top 6, Toulouse are currently outside that. So Toulouse are threatening legal action. They're threatening a boycott this year's Champions Cup's quarterfinal, semi-final, and final, and next year's to try and get their way to the whole thing. Like Project Restart with football. Yeah. Once you start getting into the ramifications, like everyone wants to play, fans want to see the games, but once the club owners start thinking about the impacts of all this, and this before we even get to whether the players want to do it. And my understanding is at the moment they do, that they're behind. As long as the RFU say it's safe, they want to do it. But yeah, you're hoping that all of this comes together somehow and they pull it off, which I think logistically speaking will be an incredible achievement. Yes, incredible. It's really hard to imagine right now. 2 or 3 very last quick small bits and pieces people may have missed. There was a game last November where Munster were playing Edinburgh and the Edinburgh player lifted up the padding around the post to make it harder for Munster to score a try. So the whole scoring against the post is gone. They've passed a new law. That was on borrowed time, I think. Yeah, it's one of those. I guess it's just a sign that behind all of this big picture stuff that we're talking about, there's still people thinking about the game and the sport and the rules and all these sort of things. It's maybe it's a little bit reassuring to see kind of an idiosyncrasy in rugby. One of rugby's lesser known laws or kind of but anyway, yeah, it's gone. So you can't. I think CJ Stander scored against the post against England in that Grand Slam game. It was a rule that you could score against the base of the post. I think padding made it much easier, and clever coaches like Joe Schmidt would have told players to target that post. So yeah, that they've decided that's too easy. It's gone. I mean, I don't know if making tries harder to score is a good idea, but I don't know how much of a material impact it will have. But I'm sure no matter what, once rugby returns either in New Zealand or in the autumn, someone will put the ball against the post and celebrate, and the ref will have to tell them the rules have changed because there's always a few slow on the uptake who haven't been paying close attention or listening to off the ball over the course of their lockdown. Oh, I'll imagine. They're too busy on TikTok. It is addictive, TikTok. I mean, I scoffed at it when I first heard about it, and now someone in my household is on it, and it's hard. It's just hard to put down. So to finish, then Ulster. You mentioned the Leinster players who've gone up there. Will Addison has signed a 2-year extension, but Jordi Murphy has gone up there as well, and he's also signed a 2-year extension. Jordi Murphy was a real favourite of Joe Schmidt for the time, and Schmidt had real trust in him. And Murphy went at a time when the Leinster back row was not such an easy place to get into, and deserves credit for that. He seems to have done very well up there. Where is he in the Irish thrust of things? And I guess your thoughts on him staying on for another 2 years? Seems like he's enjoying it. Well, it's worked out for him. It's worked out for him personally, I think. I mean, it's one of those cases where he signed for Ulster because he wasn't getting an opportunity at Leinster. And then Jack Cronin got injured and he ended up starting a Champions Cup final over in Bilbao, which was 2 years ago yesterday, I think. But I think he's enjoyed it up there. I went up and spoke to him a couple of months in, and he was enjoying it. He was hoping that it would reap the reward. I mean, did he get on the World Cup? He got out in the World Cup after Jack Cronin got injured. I think he missed out in the initial squad. So Joe did have a bit of trust in him. I think he got injured quite soon after getting over there. So it was a bit of a disaster for him. He was one of those players that's coming back to me now. It's like all these things that happened about 6 months ago that I've forgotten because of this. He was one of those players who was last to stay in training with the squad after he'd been left out. So Joe named the squad and then asked freedom to come back into training. So he went up to Belfast to Ulster. It's gone pretty well for him he's an Ulster starter. He's one of their best players. But when Andy Farrell named the Six Nations squad, he wasn't in it. I don't think he even made the wider training squad. He's been usurped by Will Connors, the young Leinster player who's yet to win a cap but is ahead of him in the pecking order, and Caelan Doris, who I think had we had a few more weeks of Six Nations would have been Ireland's number 8 for the rest of it. So I think when Andy Farrell talks about aggression and mindset, I think he's looking at someone like Murphy, and I think he'd like to see a bit more, to use a Brian O'Driscoll phrase, a bit of dog, I think a bit of thuggery. a bit, he's a real thoroughbred, Jordi Murphy. I think, say he went to Australia, he'd be perfect because he's a real top of the ground player. He's quick, he's smart, but he's probably not the biggest back row forward. He probably doesn't have the Dan Levy levels of aggression, but he's still relatively young. He's probably coming into the peak years, and a bit like Jack McGrath, it's a bit of an endorsement for what Dan McFarlane's doing up in Ulster. That he hasn't looked to come back to Leinster, that he said, no, this is where they made me welcome here. I'm a senior player. I'm a starter. I like what I'm hearing. And McFarlane has definitely done a good job in that. I think players have bought into it. So it's an endorsement for that. I think it makes anything that makes the other provinces stronger and closes the gap with Leinster is definitely a good thing. And I guess it gives them a platform to go and try and impress Andy Farrell whenever we come back. And maybe the one thing I'd love to see is that those Interpros go ahead and they're kind of Ireland trials, and we see proper, the Interpros have been so diluted in the last couple of years. But if Jordi Murphy's annoyed that he's not in the Ireland squad, what better way of taking it out than going after Will Connors and Caelan Doris and at the Aviva Stadium? Maybe it'd be fake crowd noise and all that sort of stuff like the K-League last Friday morning. At least to be something, a bit of bite to it, because I think there's players there who will have something to play for, especially if those tours are going ahead. And Murphy's one of those. He's a guy who probably feels like he's something to prove. So bring it on. The quicker we can get back to talking about that sort of stuff and not be talking about epidemiology and immunology and all that sort of stuff, and I can get back in my comfort zone, I'll be pretty happy.
Yeah. One last point then, and I know you've been covering this in the Irish Independent, the James Cronin situation. Brendan Fanning in the Sunday Independent had the story that Sport Ireland, we had thought, would have had to make up their minds, I think, by Monday as to whether or not they were appealing the leniency or any other aspects of the Cronin 1 month suspension. And it turns out that they have asked for all the file documentation surrounding this case, which means that window has now been extended. They still have more time because they've asked for these documents to decide whether or not they're going to appeal the Cronin suspension. So that is still very much alive, the Cronin situation.
Yeah, and Dr. Una May has said that that the price of doing it will not put them off. I think it can be quite expensive to take a case to the Court of Arbitration for Sport, which is where it will go next. WADA are also still reviewing the case, as far as I'm aware. I don't know if the window has been extended for them as well. I presume that if they get further information, that it'll go to them as well. I'm sure they can work in tandem. I'm not sure exactly how these things work. So yeah, it's an open case. It remains to be seen whether they actually pursue it or not. I presume we'll hear in the next week or two whether they decided to appeal it. I think for closure almost, it would be good to take it to another level and kind of get a bit, even just to see James Cronin be cross-examined in the way that EPCR's independent judicial officer didn't do so, would be good. I mean, it would be nice to hear from James Cronin, to get him to come out and actually kind of speak about it. I think will be beneficial. I think it would do him some favours. It would do Munster some favours. At the moment, that's not happening. They turn down interview requests. So yeah, I guess while it's a live case, maybe he doesn't want to do it. And yeah, so they've appealed for further information. We're kind of in a wait and see mode. And yeah, I think they hope that story they hope would have gone away by now. But thanks to Brendan's good work, and John Tracy did say that he found that the suspension was a little bit lenient, the 1 month ban, when he was doing the kind of launch of their anti-doping report. And I think that is probably the basis of what if they do pursue the appeal, that's what they're going.
And the way that Tracy thing happened, we were both on that Zoom call. That was a press conference, and it was put to him as the premise of a question. So John Tracy, people might be curious about this. He didn't bring this up. He didn't say, there's a point I want to make here. It was specifically put to him that, not least in a climate where there is no rugby happening, which is not James Cronin's fault, but in that climate, a 1 month suspension seems lenient. And then Tracy said that is the case. So he didn't go to town on this. He didn't. He was trying to avoid saying anything too confrontational or to blow this thing up. But that's, if you saw Tracy the next day in the papers or have heard about that, that was how that exchange happened. And they haven't said much more beyond that. Neither of Munster. I mean, I don't know, is Cronin allowed to talk, not allowed to talk? We've had so little information. The net result has been that, and I suppose especially with Brendan Fanning over the last couple of weeks, and Jerry Thornley revealed potential legal action happening in this case to do with the pharmacy in Cronin. What has happened has been a complete vacuum of information ever since that Monday. Nothing from Munster, nothing from the Munster doctor, nothing from the Munster CEO, nothing on the lessons learned, and obviously nothing from the player himself. And so just a vacuum. And that they may have hoped that would be the end of things and it would go away. But actually it's just resulted in constant stories, constant talk about this. And I would say probably a general lack of satisfaction about the amount of information which has come out about the case. And I suspect you found the same thing when you've tried to put in various interview requests. That information is not forthcoming. Any and all questions being asked are not forthcoming. And I'm not sure that's doing the game a huge service at the moment.
Oh, and I'm sure it's been an uncomfortable month for James Cronin as well. I think he's available to play again tomorrow or Friday. I think the ban is almost up. So, if we go back, he would hope and expect to be back training pending this appeal. Obviously, yeah. I think to your earlier point about John Tracy, I wonder if you regretted even the candor, because there was very little other candor on that call. It was very corporate. They were quite safe sport, and I can understand.
They didn't want to go near this. They didn't want to go near this, and this was the week. This was the week where it had been reported that the player who would turn out to be Ray Walker had tested positive, and they didn't want to go near that either. And I understand. I mean, they can't just get into speculating with journalists about things. So I'm sure he wanted to say nothing about it.
Yeah, but there's clearly a level of discomfort there, and that's why they're considering the appeal. Yeah. And I guess if they don't appeal, that probably concludes the chapter. I think there's very little. I don't know where to go after that.
Yeah.
And we'll all move on with James Cronin will move on, but he'll always have this beside his name. It'll always be on his Wikipedia page. It'll be there when you Google him. And if they appeal, we'll get more information and we'll find out more about the case. And that should be a good thing. I mean, I think we discussed the last time I was on, I think rugby should welcome scrutiny in this regard, because I think rugby needs to win this perception battle that they're not soft on this topic, that they are ruthless about it, because they should be trying to stamp out any and all doping in sports, and they should be opening their doors and showing all details about this case and all other cases. I don't see why they wouldn't. So, and there's no suggestion that they wouldn't welcome an appeal. They're just waiting to hear like we are. So it'll be interesting to see where it goes.
Yeah, well, it's still alive. That's the news from the weekend. Rory O'Connor from the Irish Independent. Thanks so much, Rory.
Thanks, Joe.
You're very welcome along to episode 2 of Keith Wood's State of the Union, where we ask what is for the game of rugby union. Our guest this week is Paul Vaughan, who has a long career in rugby administration on the commercial side. Paul, I don't want to list off the various jobs you've had, but you've been involved with the RFU at a very